This looks familiar. I've seen that somewhere before. It's one of these, isn't it? That's the same. Your depth of field scale. Very interesting. But hang on a minute. That's not a Retina. What's this? Well, there's your answer. It's a Vollenda. It is an ancestor to the Retinas. One from Nagel. And this one looks to be in quite nice condition. I don't think I've come across one of these before, but anyway, it's here and I have to deal with it. Has it got any obvious problems? Well, there's this business going on. The whole front of the shutter seems to be rattling loose. Now I think that that's not due to the front ring not being bayoneted on. I think that the screws are loose in the back of the shutter case. So it's a wonder the shutter blades haven't fallen out. Oh, no, it's got 3 shutter blades, so they can't. They're actually pinned in place, otherwise they would have fallen out. That's the shutter coming apart. So that's the problem there, and that's why that's wobbling about, and that would certainly be contributing to the focus issues. The other issue here is the front standard. You see it's a bit lackluster and floppy. Well, looking at these arms at the top, they're sprung loaded. They're intended to pull upwards quite strongly. And if they're pulled upwards quite strongly, the front is actually quite firmly held in place. So I think that the springs either side here of this arm is what the problem is there. Anything else of note? Well, not really, because there's not an awful lot to the camera. It's a roll film camera, of course. It takes what size is that? 127. And there's not much to say about that. I see it's got 2 windows at the back, so presumably it can take two different formats there. I don't know, what's the negative size? Oh, it's fairly small, isn't it? Yeah, I mean that's not much different to a 35mm negative size. A bit wider. Yeah, interesting. Okay, so this one. I'll be taking this apart, I think, finding out all about it. I don't expect to have a problem with the shutter. I think that'll be easy. It's basically just a fairly early compor, and as you can see it's fitted with the Zeiss Tessar lens, which is nice. I'd like one of those on one of my Retinas, but I've never come close to getting one. They seem to cost a little bit of extra money. It'll be good. I'm more concerned about getting this front standard to remain rigid. I'm absolutely sure it's down to the state of those springs in the arms up here. And how I get to those, that's one of life's mysteries at the moment. I can see screws in from here and here, but whether they're easy to access, I don't know. It was often the case when things were assembled that some things, basically they were never intended to be taken apart. It may well be that's the case here. Well, as you can see, I've removed the shutter from the Vollenda, and I'll just unscrew the lens. That wasn't particularly tight, nor would it need to be, of course. In the rear group, yeah, that unscrews easily enough too. This all looks very clean. I don't know whether that indicates that somebody has spent time cleaning it or whether it's actually just done very little work in its life. There's our retaining ring, of course. That brings us down to the shutter. Now I thought that probably the mechanism plate was loose from the case. Let's check those screws. They're not loose. That's not it. But there's something going on here. Look at the state of that. So, let's be in and find out. To remove that screw from the nameplate. And there's a lock. The later ones, of course, just have two pinholes there. That bayonet's off. Nothing exciting to see there. So why was that loose? I've got no idea at the moment. Is there anything else going on here? Well, that's just the shutter speed settings cam plate rattling about there, and that's not unusual. And the shutter sort of works quite well. This is very much like the shutter that you would find on a early Retina. 3 blades, it's got the T and V settings. This pointer here for the aperture settings, that could make it awkward to get this cover plate off and on. Let's see if it does. No, you can slide it out from there. I'll unhook the spring from the main lever. And if I depress the shutter release, it pulls this arm down, of course, against the spring, and I can get at that screw. That will be the cable release socket. There was a plunger used on the Retina type 117 in that position. If I lift this, that's our return spring for our shutter release. Our high speed spring for the top speed of the shutter is 300th of a second. This little catch holds the shutter in the cocked position. It's held with a single screw. And the shutter release will probably lift off that post, I would think. Yes, it does. This has got a very small spring of its own, so be very careful not to lose things like that. And these two levers provide our B and T settings. So I will unhook that tiny spring and remove that lever. And remove this screw. And the little bush that goes with it, and that lever. This all looks quite clean. It looks like it's done very little work, and it doesn't look like it is in bad order at all. The retard gear train. Yeah, that moves reasonably smoothly. Okay, well, let's have it split the shutter and see what's going on. I think this is going to be a fairly simple strip down and clean job. This is certainly not the serious issue facing that camera. The main problem with that camera is going to be stabilising the front standard so that things stay where you left them. The case comes off. Here's our diaphragm. Now I fought with one like this not long ago, so that should be entertaining. Here's our shutter. There's the shutter blades, 3 shutter blades. And I'll have to put little marks here so I know where they came from. Somebody may have been in before me. That's blade number 1, blade number 2, blade number 3. And I'll lay those out on the bench so they go back in the same place, because these screws might be different lengths. Those screws act as the pivot point. Right, so this is blade 3. I'll put 3 tiny tick marks there so that I've got a reference, and that's the 3rd blade to go back. Remove the screw and the blade. This will be 2. I'm looking closely at that blade. I can see something going on here. I hope that's a bit of hair or something, a bit of cotton thread by that rivet. I was concerned it might be a crack in the blade. If it was a crack in the blade, that would not be good. And this is number 1. This is our blade actuating ring. This is the piece that moves backwards and forwards and swings those blades inwards and outwards. On the top, here's the lever that swings the blade actuating ring. So I'll take the screw out of that. I would be careful with its spring, I don't want to damage that. Now here, we've got 2 screws. Hopefully I can get that to turn with the tip of a pair of tweezers. The slots in those are very small. That one's turning. Put that over there because that was their blade number 3. And this one, see if I can get it to turn. Yes. That's lucky because those are my pointy tweezers, which means they're my probably least robust tweezers. And I wouldn't get less pointy tweezers in there. Alright, so their blade actuating ring should lift out, and all of this is quite clean. So this is, well, I suppose you'd say it's an early shutter of the type that populated the Retinas, and they evolved from here. I mean, they moved from 3 blades to 5 blades, but the basic layout stayed much the same. Alright, so these parts will need to be cleaned. The retard gear train, I won't remove that from the base. I'll clean that in position by flushing it with naphtha and working it repeatedly, because getting the speed set back up again on one of these shutters is tiresome. Alright, so that's in bits. That part was easy enough. Now this bit. Alright, I've got to make note of where these parts are. That moves quite freely at the moment, that's good. But this is a bit cursed, it's going to be awkward to put back together, I can just tell. These blades, the other end of those blades, the rivet goes downwards and it goes into little holes in here. And of course the diaphragm blades are interleaved, they're not just stacked one on top of another like shutter blades. So it's always fun getting everything back together. And of course you get the blades in correctly, then you've got to get this plate correctly timed to it so that the lever is in the right place. But yeah, I'm pretty confident I can do that. So when it's fully open, this pointer is up next to this cutout in the case. I can see that. Okay, so if I take those two screws out, I'll just support that on the block of wood so I can push my screwdriver down for good engagement, and the same on this side. And that lever should lift away from the bottom. It does. Okay, now everything's loose in there. If I tip that upside down, all the blades are out. I'll put that on my diaphragm assembly jig and look at it that way. Okay, now is there anything to note? Well, the case is a bit dusty looking in there. That should probably clean okay. Actually, some of that dust I see could easily be overspray from when they painted the case. Let's just see if that'll move. Where's the naphtha? No, those speckles are there to stay by the looks of it. So I would say, looking at it, I would say that I'm right, that they probably overspray when they painted the case. And I just need to get all of any loose dust, oils, grease and so forth out of here. I must say that there's not much coming off. So, the Nagel Vollenda. Well, this must date back a wee while. I'll have to go and look at my Observer's Book of Clever Cameras and see what I can find out. Apparently the camera was made in 31 or 32, so about 3 years before the first of the Retinas. It's certainly an ancestor, or an ancestral form you might say, because it takes 127 roll film, not 35mm film. And the format I think was 3 by 4 centimetres. so bigger than a 35mm frame size. Interestingly, it's a 5cm lens, what came to be the standard for 35mm cameras. Okay, well that case is as clean as it's going to get, I'd say. Here's the two shoulder screws. They're moving their blades. I'm looking at the state of these. I don't expect to find any surprises. Typically with the Retinas, the later contour shutters, the blades have a deeper rivet going in that drops into these sockets on the case than they have on the other side, because it's only passing through a thin sheet metal on the other side. So we'll just tip that over and see if I'm right. Yes, I am. Okay, so these parts I'll need to clean as well. The moving plate, it all looks quite clean already. This shutter would probably have continued to function well for some time. There's a bit of marking on these blades. As you can see, they're not exactly sticking together, so no great problem there. Perhaps a touch of oil or grease on that pivot point. Right, so these all have to clean, but I'm not seeing any terrible problems. I'm just going to swab these 10 diaphragm blades with naphtha. Hopefully they will clean up. We'll clean one now and have a quick look. If it's going to be problems, I'm not expecting any serious problems. But if there are, I might have to polish them with Brasso or something. No, it looks like they'll clean up. They're marked, but they were probably always marked. It's quite a shiny finish on that metal, that steel, and they probably always had marks on them. Mostly what I'm concerned with here is removing any deposits of grease or other contaminants that might be on the blades. That looks like it's cleaned up pretty well. So I will just go through these blades. How many have I got here? Probably 10. It's usually 10 with these shutters. Yes, 10. I'll clean up all 10 blades. Clean up this plate, and then you can see me fight trying to put the thing back together. Now I would much prefer to assemble my blades onto this piece and then lower the case over the top and try and get the pivots correctly positioned in here. This isn't guaranteed to work, and I can see that that's a problem there with my jig. What is it? Is that wooden plug too long? It might be. I'm just going to put a washer under there to lift that up. I don't want this plate rocking on there. I want that sitting down flush. My problem is simply that this socket that I normally use on my jig is slightly large diameter for the hole that's in this plate. The later shutters must have a larger hole, so that's why it's hanging up. It's suspended on there. I'm just going to have to put up with that. Now these blades, I'm putting these in here now because this is the end I'm putting into this plate is the end with the shallow rivets. The other one has got taller rivets, and they drop into the housing. I'm not convinced that this is going to work well, because I think that these blades are going to get disturbed too easily. However, if I can get it in this direction, it will be easier for me. Because if I have to feed them into here, that's a bother and a nuisance, because you're trying to overlap blades that don't want to, well, basically they're not lying flat there, you've got to get them over that lip. Alright, now the earlier blades, I've got to pull them back so I've got access to the slots. This is where it gets messy. Because the blades aren't hanging on by much. Those rivets are very shallow. Got to make sure I don't put any in upside down. Otherwise I'll have to start all over. Two more to go. That's them all in position in theory. Depends whether I can get these ones lifted up over the top without disturbing anything. And then see about getting the case on. Okay, so far so good. Now I've got to get this over in the right place. And the right place is probably there. So as that plate's revolved around that way, no, the right place would be there. No, there. I think it's there. Let's see if I can jiggle any of those rivets into position. I don't know if I'm winning or losing at the moment. And this lever has to go on. And it went about there. Can I see the holes through it? No, I've got something wrong here. Alright, let me backtrack. With a bit of luck I won't have to redo this.